Vaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskrit Naram Chaiva Narottam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Tiriyet Nashtaprayeshu Vadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 11, the symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. Text number 2 onwards. Shoku moho sukham dukkham deha patishcha mayaya swapno yathatmana khyati samsritirna tu vastavi. Just as a dream is merely a creation of one's intelligence but has no actual substance, similarly, material lamentation, illusion, happiness, distress, and the acceptance of the material body under the influence of Maya are all creations of my illusory energy. In other words, material existence has no essential reality. Let's see what's written in the purport. The word Deha Apatti indicates that the living entity falsely identifies himself with the external material body and thus transmigrates from one body to another. Apatti also indicates great suffering or misfortune. Because of such false identification under the influence of illusion, the living entity experiences the miserable symptoms described here. Maya means the false concept that anything can exist without Lord Krishna for any purpose other than the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So this is Maya, that anything can exist or anything exists other than for Krishna's pleasure. That is Maya. Not that anything cannot exist or doesn't exist. It just, if it is not for Krishna's pleasure, then it is Maya. Although the conditioned living entities are trying to enjoy material sense gratification, the result is always painful, and such painful experiences turn the conditioned soul back towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, the ultimate purpose of the material creation is to bring the living entity back to the loving devotion service of the Lord. Therefore, even the sufferings of the material world may be seen as a transcendental mercy of the personality of Godhead. Of course, the devotees always see everything as mercy of the Lord. And it is the mercy of the Lord because this is how Krishna is trying to bring back these conditioned living entities back to him. But those who are not devotees, they suffer, they cry, then, oh, why God did this to me and did that to me. The conditioned soul, imagining that material objects are meant for his personal enjoyment, bitterly laments the loss of such objects. In this verse, the example is given of a dream in which the material intelligence creates many illusory objects. Similarly, our polluted material consciousness creates the false impression of material sense gratification. But this phantasmagoria, being devoid of Krishna consciousness, has no real existence. By surrendering to polluted material consciousness, the living entity is afflicted with innumerable troubles. The only solution is to see Lord Krishna within everything and everything within Lord Krishna. Thus one understands that Lord Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, the proprietor of everything, and the well-wishing friend of all living beings. But this understanding doesn't just come. It takes long time because our consciousness has to be purified, our senses have to be purified for this transcendental knowledge or realizations to go in. It just, right now we are We are at different frequency, and Krishna's teachings, bhakti, everything is at a different frequency. So we have to prepare our heart. Heart means where the soul lives, and soul means the center of the consciousness, the source of all the consciousness. It means the consciousness that is covering the soul, it's there. So our heart, our consciousness has to be tuned in to the right frequency. And that tuning cannot just happen. It takes time. That is Vaidhi Bhakti. In material illusion, there is no understanding of one's eternal spiritual body, nor is there knowledge of the absolute truth. Therefore, material existence, even in its most sophisticated, a pious form, is always foolishness. And Prabhupada, here at least they use the word foolishness. Prabhupada would call them rascals. One should not misunderstand the example of the dream to mean that the material world has no real existence. Material nature is a manifestation of Lord's external potency, just as the spiritual sky is the manifestation of Lord's internal potency. Although material objects are subject to transformation and thus have no permanent existence, the material energy is real because it comes from the supreme reality, Lord Krishna. It's only our false acceptance of the material body as a factual self. We are not material body. And our foolish dream that the material world is meant for our pleasure that have no real existence. They are merely mental concoctions. One should cleanse oneself of material designations and wake up to the all-pervading reality of personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. And that waking up, that is the part of Guru. Prabhupada is waking us all up from our sleep and ignorance to the light of knowledge of Bhagavad. So we have to wake up to enjoy properly, to enjoy factually. Vidya mam tanri, vidya yuddhav sharirina, moksha bandhakari, adya mayaya me vinirmite. O Uddhav, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. By the expansion of Vidya or knowledge, a conditioned soul is liberated from the clutches of Maya. And similarly, by the expansion of Avidya or ignorance, a conditioned soul is driven further into illusion and bondage. Both knowledge and ignorance are products of the mighty potency of the personality of Godhead. The living being is bound by illusion when he considers himself the proprietor of the subtle and gross material bodies. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the living entity may be designated as Jiva Maya, whereas matter is called Guna Maya. The living entity places his living potency, Jiva Maya, in the group of the mundane qualitative potency, Guna Maya, and falsely dreams that he is part and parcel of the material world. Such an artificial mixture is called illusion or ignorance. So this is where the illusion is. When all of the Lord's potencies are correctly perceived in the proper categories, the living entity is liberated from material bondage and returns to his blissful eternal residence in the spiritual sky. So it sounds so easy, but takes time. That's all it takes. Because as much as impurity is there, that much purification has to be done. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is not different from his potency, yet he is always above them as a supreme controller. The Supreme Personality of Godhead may be designated as Mukta or liberated, only to indicate that he is eternally free from material contamination and never to indicate that the Lord has been freed from actual entanglement in a material situation. He is never freed. He is always above, beyond anything material. According to Srila Madhvacharya, Vidya indicates the goddess of fortune, the internal potency of the Lord, whereas Avidya indicates Durga, the external potency of the Lord. Ultimately, however, the personality of Godhead can transform his potencies according to his own desire, as explained by Srila Prabhupada in his commentary on Bhagavatam 1.3.34. Because the Lord is the absolute transcendence, all of his forms, names, pastimes, attributes, associates, and energies are identical with him. His transcendental energy acts according to his omnipotency. The same energy acts as his external, internal, and marginal energies. And by his omnipotency, he can perform anything and everything through the agency of any of the above energies. He can turn the external energy into internal by his will. But because he is omnipotent, that is the meaning of the word omnipotent. So he can do whatever. He can make internal into external energy. He can transform. Srila Sridhar Swami notes in this regard that although the Lord has explained in the first verse of this chapter that the living entity is somebody, that the living entity is never actually in bondage and therefore never actually liberated. One may apply the terms bondage and liberation if one remembers that the living entity is eternally a transcendental fragment of the personality of Godhead. Further, one should not misinterpret the words Mayaya me viniramite to indicate that both material bondage and liberation are temporary states, being creations of the potency of the Lord. Therefore, the term Adya, primeval or eternal, is used in this verse. The Vidya and Avidya potencies of the Lord are stated to be creations of Maya because they carry out the functions of the Lord's potencies. The Vidya potency engages the living entities in the Lord's pastimes, whereas the Avidya potency engages the living entities in forgetting the Lord and merging into darkness. So Vidya potency engages the living entities in the Lord's pastimes, whereas the Avidya, or ignorance, engages the living entities in forgetting the Lord and merging into darkness. And Krishna says, from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. Now somebody can, like yesterday Mataji asked, why he puts us in ignorance then, or forgetfulness. He doesn't put us in forgetfulness. We want to be in forgetfulness. So he says, he allows us. It's our desire. It's our independence. It's the misuse of our independence. We can use it properly, utilize it properly. Then he helps. If we want to remember him, he can give us knowledge, but he will test us. The testing will be there, whether we really want him or we are making a show off that we want him. Once somebody said to me that the Lord says, okay, I accept you if you tell me I'm yours. Then why he hasn't accepted me? It's been so many years since I took initiation and I told him I'm yours. I said, did you really mean that you're here? I mean, it's not a lip service that he's expecting. A simple example, Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Prabhupada gave the meaning as, oh Radharani, oh Krishna, please engage me in your service. And we are chanting every day. Those who are chanting 16 rounds, and they are chanting at least 1.5 to 2 hours every day. Every day. Then if somebody asks me, well, Why is Krishna not accepting me as a servant? Not engaging me in his service? I'm chanting every day. Well, first of all, the chanting is also a service. So if he is letting us chant, that means he is engaging us in his service. But at the same time, are we really chanting? Are we really praying? Is it coming from the bottom of our hearts? That yes, Krishna, please engage me in your service. If it is not coming from the bottom of the heart, it's just like if we apply for say, JEE entrance exam. When we fill out the application, that means we really want to sit in the exam. If we're not filling out the application, no matter how much we say I want to sit in the exam, we're not. And in the exam doesn't mean we just fill out the application, we have to prepare. Prepare for the exam. And then if we get selected or not depends how we perform in the exam. So it's not that we just got initiated or we have picked up the beats and chanting that Krishna is just going to engage us in his service. Of course, as I said, chanting is also his service. He himself says, chanting, I mean, jap yagyanam jap yagyos, which is his service, fine. But are we even performing that service properly so that we can make further progress? So this is where Vidya and Avidya. Do we really want it? So test will be there. Application form is submitted, then we have to prepare for the exam. Ekasyeva mamashasya jivasyeva mahamate bandho asya vidya nadir vidyaya chatate tara. O most intelligent Uddha, the living entity called Jiva is part and parcel of me. But due to ignorance, he has been suffering in material bondage since time immemorial. By knowledge, however, he can be liberated. Just as the sun reveals itself through its own light or covers itself by creating clouds, the personality of Godhead reveals and covers himself by knowledge and ignorance, which are expansions of his potency. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, aparayamitastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param. Besides this inferior nature or mighty armed Arjuna, there is a superior energy of mind, consisting of all living entities who are struggling with the material nature and are sustaining the universe. Srila Prabhupada states in connection with this verse, the Supreme Lord Krishna is the only controller, and all living entities are controlled by him. These living entities are his superior energy because the quality of their existence is one and same with the Supreme. But they are never equal to the Lord in quantity of power. So quality-wise, we are same, Satchita Ananda. But quantity-wise, we are infinitesimal and he's infinite. Because of quantitative inferiority of potency, the living entity becomes covered by Maya and is again liberated by surrendering to the Lord. The word Ansha or part and parcel is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Mamevansho jivaloke jivbhuta sanatana. The living entity is Ansha or a minute particle and therefore subject to liberation and bondage. As stated in Vishnu Puran, Vishnu Shakti Paraprapta. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, possesses a superior internal potency as well as a potency called Kshetragya Shakti. This Kshetragya Shakti is also spiritual potency, but it is sometimes covered by the third or material potency called ignorance. Thus, because of the various stages of covering, the second or marginal potency is manifested in different evolutionary phases. Again, very, very technical. I'll not go into details in that. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written that the living entity has been executing fruitive activities since time immemorial. Thus, his conditioned life may be called beginningless because from so many lifetimes and could be so many creations we have been through. Such conditioned life, however, is not endless. So, since the living entity may achieve liberation through the loving devotional service of the Lord. Since a living entity may acquire liberation, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur states that his liberated life begins at a certain point, but is endless, because liberated life is understood to be eternal. In any case, one who has achieved the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, may be understood to be eternally liberated, since such a person has entered into the eternal atmosphere of the spiritual sky. Since there is no material time in the spiritual sky, one who has achieved this eternal spiritual body on Lord Krishna's planet is not subject to the influence of time. So then he becomes eternally liberated, Nitya Mukta. His eternal blissful life with Krishna is not designated in terms of material past, present, and future, and is therefore called eternal liberation. In another way, we can understand this, that we could be eternally conditioned. That eternally means no beginning, no end. And then we can become eternally liberated. So it sounds like, how does it work? It doesn't work. It sounds contradictory. So how it can be understood is, in the material world, now we are stuck here, we are conditioned. Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned souls. In the material world, so suppose we are on earth for all these lifetimes. So time period of one universal creation is 311 trillion 40 billion years. That is 100 years of Brahmaji. And that's how long the universe lasts. So from our perspective, 311 trillion 40 billion is a very long time. It can be considered eternal. And we could be in the material world for many, many such creations. We don't know. So that is very long time. Now, if we look at the same 100 years of Brahmaji or 311 trillion years of us, it's one breath of Mahavishnu. In his one breath, he exhales, universes come into existence, and inhales, all the universes are gone. Here, too many things happen in one universe, but it's just one breath of Mahavishnu. So 311 trillion years for Mahavishnu is just one breath. And in Golok Vrindavan, the higher we go, the time definition or the time calculation changes. So one blink of eye in Golok Vrindavan could be equal to many breaths of Mahavishnu. So from that perspective, from Golok Vrindavan perspective, we could be away from Krishna for just few blinks of his eye. That's all. So for an eternally liberated person, few blinks of eye doesn't mean anything. And here, as it is said, in spiritual world, there is no influence of time. There is time is there, but the influence of time means people becoming old, getting disease, sick. That doesn't happen there. We all remain eternally the same. So just being away from Krishna, of course, this is still very painful for a devotee to be away from Krishna even for the blink of an eye. That's what even gopis, they were cursing Brahmaji, the creator. He said, you don't know creation. You don't know anything. Why did you create these eyelids? Because one blink of eye, we don't see Krishna, and it is terrible for us. You don't know how to do creation. Of course, gopis can say anything they want to Brahmaji or to anybody else, because this is their love for Krishna. अथ बद्धस्य मुक्तस्य वैलक्षण्यं वदामि ते विरुद्ध धर्मिणो स्तात स्थितयोरेक धर्मिणी. Thus, my dear Uddhav, in the same material body, we find opposing characteristics such as great happiness and misery. That is because both the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is eternally liberated, as well as the conditioned soul are within the body. I shall now speak to you about their different characteristics. In verse 36 of the previous chapter, Uddhav inquired about the different symptoms of liberated and conditioned life. Srila Siddha Swami explains that the characteristics of bondage and liberation may be understood in two divisions, as a difference between the ordinary conditioned soul and eternally liberated personality of God, or as a difference between conditioned and liberated living entities in the Jiva category. The Lord will first explain the difference between the ordinary living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Paramatma, which may be understood as a difference between the controlled and the controller. So let's see what he says. This is all part of Uddhav Gita. This is what Krishna is giving his instructions to Uddhavji. Suparna vetu sadrisho sakhayo yadrichyato krit nido chabrikshe ekastayo khadati pipalanam anyo niranno api balena bhuyam. By chance, two birds have made a nest together in the same tree. The two birds are friends and are of similar nature. One of them, however, is eating the fruits of the tree, whereas the other, who does not eat the fruits, is in a superior position due to his potency. So this example has been given in the Katha Upanishad also. Two birds sitting on the same branch of the same tree. That is Jiva and Paramatma. The example of two birds in the same tree is given to illustrate the presence within the heart of the material body of both the individual soul and the super soul, the personality of Godhead. Just as a bird makes a nest in a tree, the living entity sits within the heart. The example is appropriate because the bird is always distinct from the tree. Bird is not the tree, separate from the tree. Similarly, both the individual soul and the super soul are distinct entities separate from the temporary material body. The word Balain indicates that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is satisfied by his own internal potency, which consists of eternality, omniscience, and bliss, as indicated by the word Bhuyan, or having superior existence. The Supreme Lord is always in a superior position, whereas a living entity is sometimes in illusion and sometimes enlightened. The word Balain indicates that the Lord is never in darkness or ignorance, but is always full in his perfect, blissful consciousness. Thus, the Lord is Niranna, or uninterested in the bitter fruits of material activities, whereas the ordinary conditioned soul busily consumes such bitter fruits, thinking them to be sweet. So they are bitter. Whatever reactions we go through, it's not, in the end, it's not a good experience. But we think it's going to give me some pleasure. Ultimately, the fruit of all material endeavor is death. But the living entity foolishly thinks material things will bring him pleasure. The word Sakhayu, or two friends, is also significant. Our real friend is Lord Krishna, who is situated within our heart. Only He knows our actual needs, and only He can give us real happiness. Lord Krishna is so kind that He patiently sits in the heart, trying to guide the conditioned soul back home, back to Godhead. Certainly, no material friend would remain with this foolish companion for millions of years, especially if his companion were to ignore him or even curse him. This is what we do with the Lord. Something goes wrong and we just put all the blame on him. But Lord Krishna is such a faithful, loving friend that he accompanies even the most demoniac living entity, and is also in the heart of the insect, a pig, and a dog. That is because Lord Krishna is supremely Krishna conscious and sees every living entity as part and parcel of himself. Every living being should give up the bitter fruits of the tree of material existence. One should turn one's face to the Lord within the heart and revive one's eternal loving relationship with one's real friend, Lord Krishna. The word sadrisho, or of similar nature, indicates that both the living entities and the personality of Godhead are conscious entities. As part and parcel of the Lord, we share the Lord's nature, but in infinitesimal quantity. Thus, the Lord and the living entity are sadrisho. So, a similar statement is found in Shvetashvatara Upanishad. There are two birds in one tree. Okay, to Shvetashvatara Upanishad. One of them is eating the fruits, and while the other is witnessing the actions. The witness is the Lord, and the fruit eater is a living entity. So this is our position, and that is Lord's position. Atmanam anyam cha saved vidvan apiplado natu piplada yo avidyaya yukstu nitya baddho vidya mayo yah sa tu nitya muktaha. The bird who does not eat the fruits of the tree is the supreme personality of Godhead, who by his omniscience perfectly understands his own position and that of the conditioned living entity represented by the eating bird. That living entity, on the other hand, does not understand himself or the Lord. He is covered by ignorance and is thus called eternally conditioned, whereas the personality of Godhead, being full of perfect knowledge, is eternally liberated. So we are just busy in committing karmas and eating the fruits of those karmas. The word Vidyamaya in this verse indicates the internal potency of the Lord and not the external potency, Mahamaya. Within the material world, there is Vidya or material science and Avidya or material ignorance. But in this verse, Vidya means the internal spiritual knowledge by which the personality of Godhead is fixed in omniscience. The example of two birds in a tree, which is given in many Vedic literatures, demonstrates that statement Nityo Nityana. There are two categories of eternal living entities, namely the Supreme Lord and the minute Jiva soul. The conditioned Jiva soul, forgetting his identity as an eternal servant of the Lord, tries to enjoy the fruits of his own activities and thus comes under the spell of ignorance. This bondage of ignorance has existed since time immemorial and can be rectified only by one's taking to the loving devotional service of the Lord, which is full of spiritual knowledge. So this ignorance is ignorance of our identity, ignorance of our relationship with Krishna, ignorance of the love that we have with Krishna, and how to revive that love. Complete ignorance of what to do. And this can be rectified only by one's taking to the loving devotional service of the Lord, which is full of spiritual knowledge. So devotional service, loving devotional service, is not, so basically it has to take us from ignorance, complete darkness to love of Krishna, which is our constitutional position. That is bhakti. It's not just chanting of 16 rounds. Of course, Prabhupada said, just chant and you will get this. Yes, but we have to get there also. Means our heart has to be transformed. Complete transformation has to take place. That is the goal. In conditioned life, the living entity is forced by the laws of nature to engage in pious and impious fruitive activities. But the liberated position of every living entity is to offer the fruits of his work to the Lord, the Supreme Enjoyer. So in material life, we all are trying to work and enjoy the results of our work. And we enjoy in the sense, even the impious results. Why we enjoy the impious results? Because we do is bhoga. Bhoga means we get attached to everything. We suffer because of negative reactions that we get. Means we are attached. A detached person will not enjoy or suffer, positive or negative. But we do. So we are attached. But the liberated position of every living entity is to offer the fruits of his work to the Lord, the Supreme Enjoyer. It should be understood that even when the living entity is in a liberated condition, his knowledge is never equal in quantity to that of the personality of Godhead. Even Lord Brahma, the supreme living entity within this universe, acquires only partial knowledge of the personality of Godhead and his potencies. Nobody can understand Krishna fully. The supreme personality of Godhead said, many, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. This is told to Arjuna. And also bound or conditioned means we are eternally dependent on the Lord, either in both in conditioned or liberated state. In the kingdom of Maya, the living entity is bound to the cruel laws of birth and death. Whereas in the spiritual sky, the living entity is fixed in a bond of love to the Lord. Liberation means freedom from the miseries of life, but never freedom from one's loving relationship with the Lord, with Lord Krishna, which is the essence of one's eternal existence. According to Srila Madhvacharya, the Lord is the only eternally free living entity, and all other living entities are eternally dependent and bound to the Lord, either through blissful loving service or through the bondage of Maya. So through the bondage of Maya, we are bound to his Maya laws or his external potency. We are all bound in illusion. But in liberated condition, we are bound up with love for him. The conditioned soul should give up tasting the bitter fruits of the tree of material existence and turn to his dearmost friend, Lord Krishna, who is sitting within his heart. There is no pleasure equal to or greater than the pleasure of pure devotion service to Krishna. And by tasting the fruit of love of Krishna, the liberated living entity enters the ocean of happiness. And it's a wonderful happiness. I guess it is very, very technical, so I think I can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Jai Shri